A room without books is like a body without a soul.
Welcome to Sundoku, the podcast for people who know the only thing better than reading a good book is rereading that good book. I'm Michaela Andreas.
Hi Michaela, I'm Cath Keneally.
And there's a bit of news today. The Adelaide Writers' Week has a new director. It's Rosemary Milsom. She was the founding director of the Newcastle Writers' Week. Mm-hmm. So I think we're lucky to have a new director after all the kerfuffle.
Wonderful that somebody's got back up on that horse.
I know.
Very pleased to hear that. And
Yeah.
she sounds great. And speaking of rereading, I think this is the moment to go back to our library shelves and see what we've got by David Malouf, who sadly left us this week at 92.
Yes.
And in my shelves, I have The Great World, Johnno, An Imaginary Life, and Remembering Babylon.
Ah, that's the only one I've read. It was a very, very long time ago.
Yeah, read it again. It really holds up well. I had to read it again for a reading group not so long back and thought, that's fantastic.
Really? Oh, good. Thanks for the tip.
A lovely man. He really was a lovely man. So, yeah, Vale David Malouf.
Indeed. Now, Cath, you're bringing a mystery book to today's episode, but the puzzle begins with the title.
The title is What Rhymes with Murder?
Well, it's a good question.
Or what does rhyme with murder?
I was thinking about that. Maybe birder? Is birder a word?
Birder, I like it. And it is a word.
It is? Oh, good. Oh,
I think that would work. It's a twitcher, somebody who likes watching birds.
Oh,
I think there is a word, birder, so very nice.
Well, there's a long tradition of hunting down words that don't have a word to rhyme with them. I think the most famous is orange.
It is the most famous, and thereby hangs a tale because my middle son was right into skateboarding as a teenager. He made himself a thing that was a sort of hard poly kind of toe cap that went over his skating shoes, and he christened it a borange.
Rhymes with orange. Well, orange made me think of Trump because what else can you think of when you think orange? And I remember, what month was it? I think it was January when he announced the Venezuelan president had been captured and that it was with the help of was that discombobulator? Yeah, that's the word. So I was thinking, there's another one. Thanks, Donald.
Thanks, Donald.
Anyway,
he's got a million of them.
I digress. So tell me about What Rhymes with Murder. Is this one we should be reading?
Well, I enjoyed it a lot. It's by Penny, I think it's Penny Tangey. It might be Tangey, Tangey. She apparently is a stand-up comedian as well, and she's written a lot of children's books. This is her first adult novel. It's got a lot of babies in it. And What Rhymes with Murder comes from baby rhyme time at the local library, which is the East Melbourne Library, which is where Penny Tangey lives in East Melbourne. And as a matter of fact, I know the East Melbourne Library. I'd been to several book launches there, and I interviewed her in the East Melbourne Library when I was in Melbourne. So that was very good fun. A lot of the book describes the locale, and some of the people in it are, locals in grand houses or the main couple with the baby. She's just emerging out of postnatal, anxiety, fog, and she takes her baby to baby rhyme time, and that's where it all kicks off. So body in the library, killer on the loose, the classic trope.
Mums solve the crime.
But it's very good fun to read, and in fact, it's not as sort of light and frothy as you might think, and she'll make that clear.
Excellent.
And Michaela, you are bringing one of our favourite guests back into the studio. What have you and she got for us?
Right. Well, I'm talking to Associate Professor Lisa Bennett about her new book, Yet She Lives. Now, all the clues to this book are in the subtitle. It's Fierce and Fantastical Women of Norse Mythology.
Oh, that's her baby.
It's her bag, absolutely. So as an academic, she brings all the rich detail you can imagine to her retelling of the stories of these formidable women of Norse mythology. But she shines even brighter, I think, as a storyteller. She's really got it. The book positively rockets along because she's just so passionate about bringing these stories of these women to the fore. And I think if you follow Lisa on Instagram, as I do, you'll often see her dressing up as a Viking or creating medieval feasts for her friends. You know, she's just got so much imagination.
I can see her. She's got all the makings of a Viking.
Yes, she does.
Hasn't
She's
she?
tall, blonde, gorgeous, formidable. Yeah, that's Lisa. And I must admit, as I was reading the book, really enjoying it, I was new to Norse mythology, so it was great. But I found myself daydreaming about how great it would be to be her daughter, and just imagining what it would be like having her telling, you know, bedtime stories. And anyway, it was
wandering in with a helmet with horns.
She would. I'm sure she would dress up for bedtime. Anyway, back to our first book, Cath.
Yes, it is What Rhymes with Murder? A Body in the Library, A Killer on the Loose, An Unlikely Group of Sleuths by Penny Tangey. And I tracked down Penny where the book is set. And here we are sitting in the East Melbourne Library, which I know really well, and which obviously is your local. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the book What Rhymes with Murder? A Killer on the Loose, and An Unlikely Group of Sleuths. It is a great title, and the rhyme in the title has some bearing on what's going on. So it's baby rhyme time, and what's going on.
So Frida's a new mother. She's got a 6-month-old baby, and she's had a bit of a difficult time having her first baby, and she's starting to get out and about a bit more. So she goes to the local library to go to baby rhyme time, and she's having a lovely time until there's a scream and a thump, and then there's a body in the library.
Frida, who we've just met, has a very fabulous internal monologue going on. I think that might owe a bit to your being a previous stand-up comedian. She's got a lovely amount of self-irony going on. She thinks in kind of alternately self-critical and comical ways. What's going on in her head and in her life at the time?
Yeah, so she's had, I think, a lot of anxiety after having a baby and found it very difficult to leave the house. But she's sort of already had treatment for that, and she's sort of recovering, and she's trying to get out and about a bit more. Like when I'm writing it, I don't think I try to be funny. I think sometimes I find writing a little bit boring, and so I think I'm just trying to entertain myself. Basically, I think I've realised that's probably why I end up putting in sort of things that are meant to be humorous, and at least I find them amusing, and then hopefully other people do.
Well, they made me laugh. This is your first adult novel, and you've written successful children's books before. Was it that experience that made you think, I'll put babies and children and mothers in this one?
It was more just the idea. I think because when I first had a baby, I was like walking around the community a lot more, and I was looking at things, I was talking to people, whereas when I was working full time, I was sort of like, I felt like I was sort of missing a lot of what was happening around. And I listened to a lot of cozy mysteries on audiobook, and so I just thought that this was an interesting scenario for an amateur detective.
For me, reading the book, I thought the point of the book really, apart from the entertainment value with the amateur sleuths and the mystery and that cosy aspect, really is community, the East Melbourne community, and you put a lot of love and care into describing that. And I wondered if you could give us a little snapshot of your sense of this community. I think at one point in the book you say it's wealthy people with dogs, but with some incomers like Frida and Ben who are, who's living in a lovely little deco apartment block.
I think I sort of tried to create a kind of, because cosy crime often is a bit idealised and a bit aspirational. So it's not exactly my experience that you walk around the street and then, people invite you into their gracious homes and you all become friends immediately. Like, that's not exactly how it works. But having said that, like, being in East Melbourne, like, people are quite friendly here, and there are some sort of local hubs like the library and like the general store where you see the same people all the time, you get to know people and you say hello, and people do help each other. So, yeah, it's sort of like a little village feeling within the inner city, I think, yeah.
Okay, and so Frida's just coming out of her shell and she's out and about. This is her first venture, baby rhyme time. She meets some nice people, but something goes hideously wrong. Can you just describe to us what happens as they're all sitting around singing?
Yeah, so they hear a scream and a thump, and then I think someone comes in and tells them that someone's fallen from the mezzanine in the library. And then Frida goes out to change her baby. He needs a nappy change, and she sees the woman who's on the floor down below, and she finds that very shocking. She's very worried that she's traumatised her baby, but of course he's only 6 months old, so he has no context for these things and is instead just watching the fan above rotate because he's fascinated by that. And so I think initially Frida's not interested in getting involved at all, but sort of gets drawn in partly through other people's curiosity, but partly through her own curiosity as well.
And she pals up immediately with Josh, who's there with Seti. Maybe you should talk us through who else is in that little group. It comes to matter in the story.
Those two are the ones with babies. So Josh and Frida have babies, and then there's also the owner of a cafe where they go all the time, who is very friendly and very nice to them. And there's a local historian who sort of teaches them about the history of the suburb. There's a lady who owns a very big house, and she's very friendly and nice and lets them in a way that might seem suspicious at times, but actually she's just being very nice. And there's also a doctor, because I think it's useful to have a doctor around.
The body in the library, it is almost the classic golden age trope, isn't it? And that in itself is amusing, but you have a history with libraries, and I guess that appealed to you. But this one in particular is a special library, the East Melbourne Library.
It's a strange library in a way, because it's set in it's built in a residential street. It's not where you would normally expect the library to be, because they're normally in kind of on high streets or in busy areas. It's quieter than most of the other libraries around here, and that's why I actually brought my kids here for rhyme time and story time, because some of the other libraries that have 20 or 30 kids and it was full on, and this is more like just a little group, and it's lovely. I go to lots of different libraries. It's one of the good things about libraries is that they're all different, both in their kind of spaces that they have and the collections that they have. So, yeah.
And as you mentioned a little earlier, you do find a way of taking us inside a grand house in the neighbourhood. Frida's out, she gets caught in the rain, and this woman invites her into her house, and it turns out that the three sisters who live there, they're almost Dickensian, this trio. Grace and Mariana and Christine. And that is where a somewhat more sombre, serious theme enters, because near Grace's house is a particular place of business where Dr. Christine works. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so it's an abortion clinic, and it's not located where there actually isn't clinics in East Melbourne. I deliberately didn't put it where the actual clinic is. A lot of the events that led to abortion law reform have happened in East Melbourne, which I found very interesting, and I did quite a bit of research about that, and sort of those stories are a little bit parallel to the plot. I just thought it was an interesting part of history that is very sort of intertwined in the fabric. There's so many buildings where I can walk past and go, oh, that's where that event happened, and that's where this happened, and yeah.
Well, I learnt quite a bit, and in fact I'm old enough to remember Bertram Weiner and all of the amazing, now it seems astonishing corruption and mayhem that surrounded his attempt to be an available abortion provider for women. But I learned about his receptionist as well. Is that true?
Yeah, I hope all the stuff about Peggy Berman is true. There's some story. Everything that happened with that story is just absolutely wild. Like her involvement, because she worked in a clinic and she was involved basically facilitating the bribes from the clinic to the police, because they were routinely just bribed by health providers who would performing abortions. So she was taking that role, how much she was also getting, she said that she just did that altruistically, but how much she was also getting paid for that. And anyway, at some point the police just went, nah, we're not doing this anymore, and raided the clinic, and then it was mayhem, and then she was having an affair with a policeman at the same time who was horrible to her. And she has the best. She wrote an autobiography, and then she had cancer through the whole thing. So and then she informed on the police, and then had to go through all this. She was in the news, and she had to go to this commission, and such a mad life. And she has the best title for her autobiography ever. Have you heard of it? It's she titled it "Why Isn't She Dead?"
Yeah, herself.
Yeah. Because, that's what people kept saying about her. Like, why isn't she dead? Like, how is she surviving all of this? So, yeah, it's interesting, like, reading those books. And Bertram Rain also wrote an autobiography about his time. So there's, like, really good kind of first-hand accounts of what was happening. Well,
that is really fascinating, I find. And you successfully interwoven that more serious matter, the politics of women's rights, and then there are themes of safety, personal safety, mental health, and the divergent societal norms. I mean, we've got the library on the first day when baby rhyme time is happening. It's the family of the sacred child are meeting as well, and they're about to go out and protest outside the clinic. So I think it's terrific how you keep a balance between the light, frothy, more bubbly stuff. And I don't know, do you have a serious intent in writing it as well?
I probably wouldn't have been very interested, to be honest, if it was just, if there wasn't that kind of historical aspect or social issue involved. I just probably would have, I wouldn't have got through the years that it took to write it without that kind of level of interest for me. I think whether it is a good balance is very subjective. Like, I know for some people it will be like, no, I don't want to think about these things. When I read cozy mysteries, I want like a nice cake and someone got poisoned because they weren't going to get their inheritance, like that, that kind of thing. And that's fine. So I guess. But some people, I think, are quite surprised and maybe enjoy the book more because there's a bit more of those kind of social issues and genuinely still controversial things.
That absolutely is true for me. I did enjoy it more for that reason. It's being promoted largely as cosy crime, isn't it? So do you find when you talk about it that you have to give people caveats about what they might find if they haven't read it?
Yeah, I do worry because everyone's got so many individual experiences, and I just know that things, particularly about having children and fertility and birth, are so personal, and so they can be this massive part of people's lives that you don't even know about and they haven't told you. And so, I worry about people reading it sometimes who might suddenly go, oh, I didn't, want to think about this from a lot of different angles. Yeah, sometimes I don't want to think about it either.
I think it makes it a great accomplishment because it was very entertaining but also very thought-provoking. We're going to come to a point where we can't give any more spoilers, but would you like to just take us through a little bit more of what happens after Frida and Josh, who becomes very important in the story, find themselves in the spot they're in and start investigating? What happens up to the point where you can't say any more?
One of the things that makes Frida feel like she's more involved is that she ends up with a piece of evidence that she has on her person that she feels like she has to go back and give that back to the police. And then through kind of walking around the suburb, sort of just observing things that are going on. There's break-ins at the clinic and things like that. So they're just sort of seeing things happen, which then makes them want to go and ask some questions themselves.
And at the end, I don't think we'll say any more about how they figure out what they figure out. And that's a terrific ending, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Quite nail-biting. And you leave the door open very obviously for a sequel. I think Josh and Frida say to each other, well, if such a thing should happen again, perhaps we wouldn't be averse to investigating.
It wouldn't be our fault. Like, if we didn't try to get involved, it just happened. So, yeah, I mean, I've started writing another sequel, so we'll see how it goes.
That was Penny Tangey, author of What Rhymes with Murder. And as you heard, she has another book, Cooking, and the way these things work, I suspect we might be looking forward to that this year sometime.
So from plucky new mothers solving crimes to the formidable women of Viking mythology, we're keeping the female quotient high in today's episode. Stay with us as Lisa Bennett breathes life and warmth into the women who all too often received scant attention in the sweeping sagas of the frozen north. As a newbie to these sagas, I began by asking Lisa just to pinpoint for me when the Viking Age actually began.
Imagine some blurriness around these dates, but if you look at Anglo-Saxon or English, British sources, they neatly add some sort of boundaries of 1066 at the end. That's when William the Conqueror came and very conveniently gives us a nice end date. And they start it with the attack on Lindisfarne in 793. So these are very British-centric dates because this is when Vikings started to really interact with people in the British Isles. If you look at Scandinavian sources, the dates are a little bit broader because, of course, from their perspective, they've been around a lot longer than their interactions with the British. So add another 100 or so years on to that earlier date, and the ending is a little bit more of a petering out. But roughly 8th century to around the 11th century is when we might think of it as the peak of the Viking Age.
Where did your passion for these people come from?
It came from my honors year at university when my wonderful lecturer at the time, Professor Graham Tulloch, was teaching a class that was about Beowulf and Old English literature. But he also said, well, if we're going to look at this world of these stories, it's important to look broader and realize that at the same time in Iceland, there were these wonderful sagas being written. And so he set a saga as one of our readings for this class. And it was Laxdæla saga. I had never even heard of it before. I didn't realize Iceland was such a literate nation then and now, like I had no idea. So started to read this saga about these incredible people, incredible women. The very first woman you meet in that saga is in the Deep-Minded, who I wrote about in Viking Women, and she's a grandmother who travels, who stakes a huge claim in Iceland. It actually gets about 20% of the whole country after saving her grandchildren and marrying them off strategically between Scotland and Iceland. And so I was like, where did these women come from? Where did these stories come from? And for that class, Graham had set an essay topic saying, what role do women play in these sagas? And my brain just exploded.
And there's the rest of your life.
Yeah. I had no idea before that point that I would be so obsessed with women from the Viking Age. And if I hadn't studied that at honors, I would not be here
Isn't it
today.
incredible?
Yeah.
Just those moments in your life. So you hold a PhD in Old Norse Icelandic literature.
Yeah.
How do you learn something so complicated in another language? How did you go about this?
I mean, the flippant answer is it was so hard, and I don't recommend it. It was, I guess, because there is a part of academia that's very, very interested in this area. So there are a whole bunch of experts in Old Norse literature, Scandinavian history. Many of them are in the Northern Hemisphere. So to be a Canadian in Australia writing about Icelandic literature, I'm like, what was I thinking? But Graham knew the language very well and knew the sagas very well. So he became my PhD supervisor. We are also blessed in Australia to have some of the world experts in Old Norse literature here. Margaret Clunies-Ross was at the University of Sydney and was very generous to postgrads like myself in offering advice and holding workshops and inviting me to them. So it was a matter of teaching myself the language with help, learning it as well as I could, going to conferences to run my ideas past actual experts, and taking quite a long time to do it.
And I have to say, it comes out in your work, and it must have taken a great deal of passion.
I'll be completely honest and say that by the end of my PhD, I thought I would never go near this material ever again.
That's every PhD in the history of the world.
You have to get to that stage with your PhD, otherwise you'll never submit it. You'll just keep tinkering with it.
You have to hate it.
So I had a little bit of a breather after finishing the PhD, and then I thought, I never really got stuck into the women's stories that I really, really wanted to tell. And again, Graham has always been this lovely touchstone throughout my career, and it was long after I'd finished my thesis and we had a coffee, and I said, look, I've got this idea about writing about Viking women, and this is how I want to do it, and this is who I want to write about. And then the passion was just bubbling out, and I went, okay, maybe I don't hate this material after all. And I want to come back to it and write multiple things about it.
I have to say that I've never studied anything remotely Norse in my life. So your book was my introduction, but I was struck immediately just by how different it is to the Judeo-Christian tradition. Mm-hmm. It's, for starters, the world begins with a frost giant, Ymir. Ymir. And the first few generations are of men.
Yeah.
There are no women.
There are no women. They just appear out of nowhere. Where did they come from?
The land is made of the giant.
Out of the giant's body.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's a kind of confronting creation story in that it starts off with battle, basically. It starts off with the nothingness. So there are quite a few similarities where you can see Christian idea has been retrofitted. Were they similar? Is this something that's a kind of trait of all creation stories? But out of nothingness came something. But in this case, what came out of nothing was magic rivers and magic water from which Ymir's body came, and then a cosmic cow licks him out of the ice, and his body gets scattered to become the different realms. But his body gets scattered. I'm going to check my phrasing there because that sounds like, oh, it just dispersed across the universe. But no, at the same time, so he's a great giant. He's one of the first ever giants. And the first gods are these three brothers, one of whom is Odin, decide that it would be a good idea to attack Ymir and kill him and chop him up and distribute his body to make the earth, which is like, hooray, here are the realms, here's the universe, the world is created. But it means that in this worldview, this kind of feud goes all the way back to the beginning of time. Yeah. And when we look at all the myths, the battle between the gods and giants, the hatred between these two different peoples, it explains everything.
And it seems to go on ad infinitum.
Forever.
Because even Ragnarok, which is meant to be the finale, is not necessarily the finale. It's just on again. So we can get to that a little bit later, I guess. But the other thing that really struck me as I was reading Yet She Lives is the myths don't take a conventional approach to time either. And you've got a great line in there where I think is it Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where you say it's a timey-wimey thing?
Oh, that's from Doctor Who, the wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey nature of time. And it is, I think that's a classic kind of element in myth, is that kind of all time and no time, that this is happening once upon a time, but we can't really pinpoint when. But the timeline in Norse mythology is particularly confusing because it seems like everything is happening at the same time, or things already happened that shouldn't have happened then, but then it has some sort of impact and we don't find out about it later. So it can, if you try, as many academics have, to lay it out in sequence, you'll find it's futile.
But that's a sorting sort of instinct in humans, isn't it? To sort.
To make sense of this.
These are stories that haven't been written down for centuries, that have been told, and then presumably new ones have come a couple of centuries later, and then some other ones were remembered or so forth. So it's not that kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's a different kind of thing.
It's rather that kind of palimpsest of stories. So by the time we get them, they have gone through so many mouths, so many hands, so many rewritings, that I couldn't sit here and say these myths as we have them are the same myths that people in the Viking Age were actually saying.
No.
Who knows what they were saying orally? By the time they were written down, they were recorded by, the ones that we know mostly, were recorded by Snorri Sturluson, the Icelander, who was very much a Christian and very much had political agendas.
Yes.
It seems that he was trying to be objective, recording these stories as exercises in poetry, in using all of the kennings and imagery of the gods in these stories so that people could become better poets. So maybe he didn't change them that much. Having said that, maybe he did. Who knows?
Even a novice like me has heard of Valhalla. But what I didn't know until I read Yet She Lives is that there is also Folksvang, hosted by Freya the goddess. So I thought maybe this would be one of Snorri's things where he's just sort of downplayed Freya and played up Valhalla. What are your thoughts?
I think that it's tricky responding to that, because it's one of those instances which happens quite a lot with Old Norse Icelandic literature. You have to read between the lines. So when it gets mentioned, look at what's being mentioned around it and what is important and what's the role it plays. And every mention carries a lot more weight than something that we might see in modern literature. So knowing that she has warriors of her own, and in fact this sort of Valhalla-ish place of her own, and then it gets swept aside, is that just that those parts of the stories were at the mercy of time and fell away? That makes it sound innocent. Maybe it's not so innocent. Maybe she was excised from history, as so many women's stories were. I'm actually not sure what happened and why she got downplayed. Did Snorri do this on purpose? I don't know. But it's annoying.
It is. I had never heard of it. So Valhalla, we know if you die in a glorious battle, you go to Valhalla. That's the type of death you want to have.
Yep.
You feast and lead a generally good afterlife until a Ragnarok, I think. But who knew that there was another place where other valiant fighters
and that's the
also
valiant
went.
Fighters will go to Freya, but she'll also get other people that may not be being trained for Ragnarok. But there's also Hel, of course, with Hel's domain.
That's it. I was shocked to read that all women and anyone who doesn't die in battle ends up in Hel, Hel.
Old people, sick people, babies, anybody who is a man who doesn't die in battle or doesn't die valiantly will end up in Hel's Hall. And so we, I think, have to clarify, like you did, Hel, because of course it sounds so much like Christian hell. And so you immediately start thinking of, brimstone and flames. But that's not at all how her hall is. It is often depicted as a cold place, as a great hall, but you imagine it being quite unwelcoming. Whereas in some of the myths or in some of the passages in these stories, she's actually welcoming people. It is a lot more hospitable than the general image that we get. She's kind of creepy as well, so that taints the way that we view her hall. But she does welcome people to her hall, and she makes sure that they're fed and that they have the kind of hospitality that in an honor-based system like theirs would be required of a host welcoming guests. So I think that completely changes our view of her underworld, afterlife, neverworld. It's hard to place her realm in the scheme of things, but her realm compared to Freya's army is functioning in a different way. And the fact that Freya's army is kind of downplayed compared to Valhalla, well, I mean, probably because Odin is the head god and it's a patriarchal system. So, he gets all the fanfare.
So maybe it was something that at least Freya got a look in at all. Who knows?
Yeah, well, exactly.
As I was reading the book, I felt some of the women whose stories you covered were easier to illuminate than others. So a very pivotal character, Angrabotha. So she's a giantess. She's the lover of Loki, which I just have to say, I have to pause and say, it's a very funny book as well. How you write it is very funny. When at one point you're talking about Loki and you say, and then in brackets, IMHO, Imho, in my honest opinion, he's the most popular of all the gods. I laughed out loud when I lolled.
Glad. I really wanted to tackle this big, monumental, mythic subject matter in a way that was very personable and funny. So I'm glad it's had that effect.
So back to Angrabotha. So she's a giantess. She's the lover of Loki. She's the mother of 3 monstrous children who play a role in so many of the myths. But you write that she's to be found in the negative spaces. She's the raw material that gives her strange children shape. She's barely mentioned anywhere.
She's barely mentioned. So she was one that was challenging because in order to talk about her, I kind of had to do the thing I hate, which is talk about all the men in order to show where she fits.
Yeah.
Or to talk about her children. So in the myths that have Angerbotha in between the lines, they are the stories that talk about Fenrir, and they talk about Jormungand, and they talk about Hel, the children, the monstrous children. And then everyone's so worried about the role these monsters are going to play that Angerbotha herself just kind of goes back into the Ironwood where giantesses like her belong. And people stop talking about her explicitly. It's like she's there to be the broodmare and then go away again. But she does appear in a few poems as a single line, or we can assume that the giantess they're talking about is her. And they, again, like with the stuff with Freya, add so much weight by their existence, and the things that are being said make you put two and two together as a reader. So it always feels like the more you read of this mythology or the sagas, the more context you get, and the more you go, oh, now I understand why this person had a grudge, because 42 chapters earlier, someone said one thing that would have made a lot of sense to the early medieval audiences, but to somebody coming like from the most foreigner perspective possible, you have to really pay attention to what's being said. So rereading them a lot helps.
I can imagine it was hard, but you did paint a picture of her for me where I felt the ache of her losing these three children that were abominations to some, but they were still her children. Yeah. And I had a feeling for her.
That just gave me goosebumps when you said that, because that's what I was thinking. Whenever I write the retellings, my goals are, well, multifold. But one is I want to imagine what it would have been like for that character, not just as a goddess or as a name on the page, but thinking what would make them tick. I don't want to break what's there, and I don't want to write a complete fiction. I would write a novel if I did that, and many people have, and they're wonderful. But I want to make them approachable in a way that they haven't been before. And so since Angerbotha's stories are all about her children, I thought, okay, well, this is clear that her children are an important factor in her life and her story, and imagining what it would be like to love your kids despite the fact that they're monsters. And then I imagined, what would a modern mother do when her kid turns out to be a horrible murderer? It's a similar thing. You would still love your kid, even if they're awful. And so that was a good motivator for going, well, she is a giantess. She is kept on the outside. And knowing the whole context of how powerless she was, it's so frustrating, but also really, really sad. So by the time I had finished her chapter, I really felt a lot for this poor giantess that nobody pays a lot of attention to.
Well, I'm glad you gave her the attention
Thank
that she
you.
deserves. She's pivotal. Now, another one that was the opposite of that, Gunhild, I so enjoyed reading.
Oh, I love her. So Gunhild, out of all of the women in this book, is arguably the most real.
Yeah.
And I say may because even though she's known as the mother of kings, she was married to a very famous king of Norway. She had famous sons who became kings of Norway. She was a very powerful advisor for royalty, we think. It could also be, some people have argued, that she is a fictional construct, that she never existed. But if she did exist, well, some people say that she, has Danish heritage. Others say she is from Norway. Some people say she died in a bog in Denmark. Other people say, no, she didn't. And so ultimately, out of all of the women I've written about in both books, she is the one that has the most appearances across the literature. So when I came to write her chapter, I thought, how am I going to do this? And how am I going to not just replicate the mistakes that they have made in saying, well, here's my interpretation of Gunhild, and this is the one that she is. She is the desperate lover, or she's the harridan, or she's the witch, or she's the wise and sensible advisor. And so I thought, I'm going to present her as all of the things that all of the people have thought she may or may not have been. And so for her, she's the final chapter in the book, and for her story, I haven't just done one story, but she gets 9 snippets of stories where we get to see the contradictions and see all the multiple aspects of her personality, which may or may not be real.
And it doesn't have to be real. Like, this is based on your research, what is possible.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of leads me to my next question, whereas there's what you write about, but there's also how you write about it. So you're telling these myths in your own way. You're giving the evidence. You're then speculating and saying what is speculation. You're bringing in the humour, which I really. That's Bon Jovi gets a mention. I mean, there aren't many classicists that. But you're sort of mixing that storyteller and scholar, which I think is just fantastic. And I think on page 11 you say, take these stories as a mosaic. Each generation fits them the pieces together in a way that makes the most sense for their generation.
Everything that you've said there, it speaks to what I was trying to do. So I think that as somebody who is a creative writer who writes speculative fiction and will go into fantasy land gladly, and also someone who is an academic who has worked in academia for multiple decades now, I don't think there are many people who are in my position that have that wealth of experience on both sides and are willing to say, I am trying my utmost to be true to the spirit of the source material, to be historically fair. And I can't say accurate because accuracy with historical, I don't think that that's possible, but I can try to be unbiased, although my bias is quite clear in this book. But nobody can do what I can do and do the retellings and also then say, I am somebody interested in the historical aspects of these stories, the accuracy, the archaeological material, the truth. But I also know that truth involves speculation. And so that's why I thought, well, I'm going to not repress one side of my writerly or academic personality, but rather go, what happens when we bring these two things together, and acknowledge that I am going to speculate, but only so far as the source material allows.
Books and Publishing have done a review of the book, and they've likened it to one of Britain's most beloved classicists, Mary Beard.
Which was the best compliment ever. I should put that on my fridge because she is so wonderful, and even to have my name in the same realm as hers was just, I won't say I'll retire, but I could.
Yeah, fantastic. And it strikes me that is of that school. Well, I have to say, in the final chapter, Ragnarok, you go for it.
Yeah.
You are fabulous. I just loved reading it. It was like swimming in milk and honey. Just that final chapter was just like, here she goes. This is great. Where you told that story. And I did think of how your daughter must have the best bedtime story.
Yeah.
Was it fun writing that chapter?
It was fun, but also really daunting. Fun in that I was like, hooray, this is the end. But also I was hesitant at first to just let loose, even though it was quite obvious throughout this book. I was approaching all this material from a feminist perspective, and I was really, going for it. But I don't know if I had gone for it as hard throughout the other chapters as I did in that last one. And I just thought, no, you know what? I tried to downplay it a little bit for a while, and the chapter was going nowhere. And I just thought, I'm going to just pull the ripcord and write it. And when I did, then it all came together, and I just thought, well, this is actually what the book is about. And if you've made it this far, then you're already hopefully on my team.
On board, definitely on board.
And thank you so much.
So, in conclusion, I just have to say that Yet She Lives, it succeeds on so many levels, all those different levels that you are aiming to communicate with your readers on. And you've made these Norse myths accessible and engaging and relevant to an audience such as mine. And although this is just the beginning of my Norsian education, it's been a great place to start. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I was talking to Associate Professor Lisa Bennett about her new book, Yet She Lives. When you head out for a copy, note that Lisa writes under the pen name of Lisa Hannett. And anyway, I can't think of anyone who wouldn't enjoy Yet She Lives. It's a really great read.
This is Sundaku, the podcast for people who do anything for an 8th day of the week, Reading Day.
And of course, if you'd like to be in touch and tell us a little bit about what you've been reading, then send us an email, which is sundokukast, TSUNDOKU@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for joining us. I'm Michaela Andreev.
And I'm Cath Keneally. Happy reading. Catch you next time.